And as a child, my mother grew up in New York City, in the Bronx, actually. The only place I think in the world where they add the word "the" into the name of the place. But because nobody's from the New Jersey, but you're from the Bronx. Anyway, my mom grew up in the city. My dad grew up as rural as it could possibly be. His mom gardened a lot, and so he was used to eating fruits and vegetables because that's what they had, and eating stuff right out of the ground and right out of the backyard. And it was an interesting because my mom wants to wash everything and cook everything, and dad's showing me, hey, did you know you could even eat potato raw if you have to? Not that you would necessarily would, but it was just a very open. And I grew up in New Jersey. It was a farming area. We all summer long, at least, we bought a lot of produce from the local markets, straight from the farmers, who would say, oh no, don't buy that corn, that was picked this morning. Here, let us go out to the field right now and get you some fresh corn. So it was an interesting opening. And like all kids, we're trained to think we're super healthy. Unless somebody tells us we can't, we can. And I thought I was super healthy. I was very athletic, but I was also sick a lot. I had tremendous congestion problems, just tremendous congestion problems, and no idea why. At 4, I had my tonsils removed. It was very traumatic. I remember having to be held down because they were, they pump you full of ether back then, and took 4 people to hold a 4-year-old down. But after I had the tonsils removed, then I really started getting sick a lot, because now I don't have my first line of defense. And I started to really get sick a lot. Again, it was all congestion problems and allergies. And as a 5-year-old, they weren't going to let me out of kindergarten because I didn't attend enough days. My grades were great, but I just didn't have great attendance. And at 6, I started going for allergy shots. And the allergist told me all the things I was allergic to, and most of them were foods, but a lot of environmental stuff too, a lot of grasses and pollens and animal danders and all that, but allergies. So whereas nerds never leave the house unless they have, pens in their pocket with that little thing to protect their pocket so you don't get ink on the shirt. In that pocket, I carried a little packet of Kleenex. I carried tissues. I never left the house without tissues because I was always going through a pack of tissues and always relying on allergy pills and getting allergy shots every week from age 6 till 12. So, which wasn't fun. The doctor explained to me, I still remember him, and he explained to me that I was allergic to my own antibodies, basically allergic to myself. And that if I ever got sick, if I ever reacted to anything by producing antibodies, I was allergic to them. So I would produce more antibodies to which I was allergic. And he said, I'm just going to have to live with it. I had my first experience of medical intervention, or I guess that's my second because tonsils were gone already, but I had my second experience of medical intervention because every so often he would vacuum. He would have to vacuum up my nose and go up into all my sinuses with a vacuum tube and then vacuum my sinuses. It's an experience no one should ever have to. I'll put that among the worst things that's ever happened to me. And as a kid, I had to endure it. So I didn't really outgrow these allergies. They got worse in many ways, and my eyes started to shut. My lungs started to shut. I never had full-blown asthma, but I was getting closer and closer to that direction. And as an athlete kid, eating everything and anything, eating my weight in dairy every year, eating my weight in meat every year, eating my weight in candy every year, eating I only ate one meal a day. It wasn't that I ate that much. I only ate one meal a day, but it was from when I woke up until I went to bed. And I occasionally stopped snacking in order to sit down and eat a meal. But basically, I just continually ate. And I was always wanting more. I was always hungry. Part of that's being an athlete. Part of that's being a kid. But part of it was that the food was never satisfying, because I eventually experienced what satiation was about. which I'll get to in a minute. So I had a health teacher, a very serious guy that I respected tremendously, my physical education teacher, Jim Asbell, in seventh grade. And he said fruits and vegetables were good for you. In high school, I took health courses every year, and the teacher was a guy named Joe Rosati. Um, Joe Rosati, you might have heard of him. He's the guy who said, "Okay, boys, pair up in threes." I don't know if you ever heard that, but I'm still trying to figure that out.
I have heard that. I don't know where I've heard that, but that is.
That was from Joe Rosati, and he said fruits and vegetables are really important for an athlete. Well, I went to college and studied health and physical education. I took nutrition every semester, and the teachers all stressed the importance of fruits and vegetables. What they actually said was that fruits and vegetables were the most nutritious foods for humans. They said they're the best for us, fruits and vegetables. We need to eat more fruits and vegetables. In my professional training, I was fortunate. I became a chiropractor, and I could take nutrition courses every semester, although most of them ended up being, higher levels of organic chemistry, but it was still nutrition, really. And what we learned was that fruits and vegetables were good for you, that they were more nutritious than other foods, and that we should eat more fruits and vegetables. Well, and I got to the point where I said, gee, I wonder what would happen if I ate fruits and vegetables like everybody's been telling me all the way through school. Even back in third grade, where the nurse had a sign that said an apple a day keeps the doctor away. Okay, so I wonder what would happen if I ate only the foods that were best for us to the exclusion of everything else. And everybody said the same thing. When I asked them about this, they all my advisors and coaches and mentors, and I went to people and said, gee, I have this idea. I wonder, and they all said, fruits and vegetables are good for you, but you can't just eat fruits and vegetables. And I'm going, if they're the best, doesn't that mean everything else is less than best or second or third or fourth? I want the best. Why wouldn't I want the best for myself? I want to be as self-constructive as possible. Okay, maybe in my 20s, I wanted to be a little bit self-destructive, but I want to be as aware as possible. And maybe, again, back in my college days, I was trying to dull down my awareness a few times. I got distracted here and there, but as an adult, I want to be as aware as I possibly can. I want to know what's going on. I want to remember if I have a good time. If I see somebody again, I want to remember their name. I want to be able to learn stuff for as long as I can. I want to maintain my physical health, my emotional health, my mental health, my chemical health. I want to feel good. It's not about living forever, but I sure want to feel good for the whole time I live. Although as far as living forever goes, I mean, so far so good. I mean, maybe that could happen. I don't know. We do know that vegetarians live longer than people on a mainstream diet by about 7 years. And we know that vegans outlive vegetarians on the average by about 8 more years. Well, although there is some bias in the vegan movement, and I try to avoid all the bias, but there is some bias. Somebody once told me I wasn't invited to a specific vegan event because I'm a raw fooder, as if raw fooders weren't vegans also. And I go, yeah, but I'm vegan. Why would you want to be exclusive? There's not that many vegans out there in the world, So I went raw, and an amazing thing happened. Things that I couldn't do a day or two before I went raw, I could do. And one of them was run. I've always tried to run. All my life, I tried to run, but I'd always get out of breath. Always just get out of breath. And I went raw, and this friend invited me to go run. And I go, nah, I really can't run. All right, I'll try, because it was a guy that I really wanted to spend more time with. And so I tried. And we went 6 or 7 miles, and it's like I'd been unleashed, and I didn't know where it came from, because I'd never run farther than a mile in my whole life. Even when I joined a cross-country team, I couldn't finish the course in high school as an athlete. And so that was profound. I go, holy cow, what happened? And then shortly thereafter, something even more weird happened, which is, my dad trained me really well in vocabulary. He really trained me well. I've learned later in life that he trained me really well. And he would give me 5 words every week. And the next week I had to give him the definitions of those 5. And then I get my allowance was tied into that. And so, I mean, you learn 5 words a week for 10 years, you got a lot of words. And often when I was talking with people, I knew there was a word that I wanted to use, but I couldn't recall it. I could define it. I could tell people what it was, and then they'd say the word, and I go, yeah, that's it. Have you ever had that happen? Where you know the word, but you can't pull it out?
Yeah, it's so frustrating. I usually ask Alexa.
Well, that stopped happening. All of a sudden, I had access to all my words. It was really weird. And then I had access to memories, and I could remember stuff that I didn't even know I could remember. And all of a sudden I could remember stuff. I could remember French that I learned in school, where I thought I'd never really learned French. I just took the course, but couldn't remember. But all of a sudden I could talk a little bit in French. And then other things like that started happening. I don't have a unique storytelling style, but my style is that I digress a lot. I love to digress when I talk. I love to change topic and fraction off, like you're diagramming sentences like we used to do as a kid, and then fraction and fraction and fraction, and then eventually get back to the point using all of those stories to get back to making the point. And you go, wow, really, there's a lot of support to this idea. And what would happen is I'd be talking to friends. I remember I was doing it with Jack Miller one time, and I said to him, what were we talking about? And he couldn't remember, and I couldn't remember. And that happened so many times. Have you ever talked to a friend and all of a sudden you go, what were we talking about? I mean, that happens to everybody. There's even a name for it. And that used to happen to me all the time. It was very frustrating. I didn't want to lose. I didn't like to give a presentation and then realize that I'd started a story and couldn't bring it back and didn't remember to ever make the point and things like that. And all of a sudden that just plain stopped. And I knew it stopped. I realized it stopped, but then I wanted to start showing people in my presentations that it stopped. So I would ask people in the lecture, hey, do you know where this is going? Do you know what we were talking about? Do you know why I'm telling you this? And no one would ever know. And I go, it's because this is what we were talking about. And they go, oh yeah, the gorilla thing or the whatever it was. So for me, it was just huge revelations happened inside my head. I could think, I could remember. Oh yeah, I could breathe. I had more energy. I noticed profound things happen. I noticed a 25% reduction in need for sleep.
Yeah, that was
25% reduction is a huge reduction. Not that I wanted to sleep less, but I wanted to recover more because I was a professional athlete. I was doing a lot of sport. I enjoy sport. I enjoy the movement. I don't exercise because I have to. I exercise and I'm active because I love to be active. I like to do stuff.
You've got to talk about that, because I was raw for an entire year, and that was, I only needed 4 hours sleep, and I wanted to sleep more, but I couldn't. And why is that? Because there was just too many hours in the day. But by the way, Sherry Likes Fruit, who's been watching all week, just made a super chat donation. So thank you very much.
There we go. So there was a lot of things going on, and I'm having revelations, and I went vegetarian for a reason that most people don't. Okay. I mean, we talked about this the other day, why all the reasons people go vegetarian, right? And I went vegetarian for a different reason. When I was in college, I was living with 2 guys and in an apartment, and we kind of were eating cheap food, and cheap food meant a lot of pasta, rice, potatoes, corn. And in my senior year of high school, I met this girl who, she told me she was vegetarian. And I said, I'm a vegetarian too. And that was my reason for going vegetarian, which nobody's told me that. So I realized actually that I was very close, and I went vegetarian and and lived vegetarian. And like most vegetarians, you think you've arrived. I was vegetarian for the best part of 7 years. And but the whole time you're vegetarian and you go to all the vegetarian conferences and you're doing all the things and attending the meetings and meeting the people. And the one thing you just keep hearing is vegan, 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 vegan. And and to a vegetarian, a vegan's kind of like the health nut. They're the bothersome people who like leave it alone already. I've already gone vegetarian, you know. But once I decided to try vegan, it was so much better. It was just so much better. But I was only vegan for a few months before going raw. It became obvious that if vegan was an improvement over vegetarian, that raw vegan had to be an improvement over cooked vegan for so many reasons, like Dr. Tim talked about, the the partially combusted hydrocarbons, which PCH. I mean, it's not just Pacific Coast Highway. It's not just that Madison Square Garden for MSG. We have other uses, and my goodness, there's so many reasons. It wasn't just the tremerogens, the mutagens, the carcinogens, the teratogens. It wasn't just it wasn't just anti-nutrients and antivitamins. There were so many reasons for not cooking food that when I actually looked into it and realized that if, have you ever heard that if aspirin was discovered today, that we could no longer legalize aspirin because it's so rife with problems that it never would have made it past we only have aspirin because it got grandfathered in when we started legalizing drugs. And by the time I looked into FDA regulations and then looked into environmental protection agency regulations, and then did some homework, I realized that if today everybody in the world ate raw, and then somebody said, hey, you could cook food, and here, oh, look, it tastes like this, or it smells like this, or it does this, or it does that, that if cooked food was discovered today, we couldn't legalize it. The Environmental Protection Agency would never let it out because it's so destructive to human health that it would never be approved for human consumption. It's just that it came in through the back door, it got grandfathered in, and the Environmental Protection Agency came in later than cooked food did. So I'm sitting here going, wow, I'm learning all this science. I'm learning the chemistry. I'm hearing the stuff. I'm learning about Humpty Dumpty. You know about Humpty Dumpty? You couldn't put the, back in the eggshell. And I watched the TV commercial, this is your brain on cooked food. Remember that one?
Yeah.
Except they said this is your brain on drugs. But it was the same thing, because what they showed you is that when you drop an egg on a frying pan, it changes irrevocably and you can't put it back together again. They were trying to convey the fact that it was fried. But truly, what I saw was the chemistry, like taking a hair and holding it over a flame. And then I learned the chemistry going through school and what's actually happening. And what's happening is called recombinant chemistry, where we're taking protein structures and literally breaking them apart and then twisting them and putting them back together, creating what are known as denatured proteins. We're creating molecules for which the human body has no digestive enzymes. Inaccessible. They're called enzyme resistant bonds. And this happens to all the proteins when we heat them, to varying degrees, depending on how much heat, obviously. But it's happening. We're creating enzyme resistant bonds. And being a doctor, I have access to a ton of information, but so does everybody else. We all know what happens when we get our lab work back, when we get our blood work back. We get a whole bunch of lab work, and we don't want to be high and we don't want to be low. It's like Goldilocks. You want it to be just right. You want to be in the parameters. And yet we were sold nutrition on the concept of more is better. which isn't true. More isn't better. That's like having a size 20 shoes instead of the size you wear. It's not better. More isn't better. In fact, more is typically, as I think you said the other day, diseases of excess, but more is also a problem because for all the fat soluble vitamins, if you have more of those, you die. You get hypervitaminosis A and you die. Uh, with the water soluble vitamins, you don't die, but you get very uncomfortable, too much vitamin C, and you get diarrhea. It's almost it's just diarrhea. And it's not fun either. So too much of nutrients, you get too much iodine and you get the exact same symptoms as you would if you had not enough iodine. That's a really weird one. That's hard to tell which is which. You have to do a little more homework. But more isn't better, even though that's how we were sold the idea of nutrition. So we had to look at a lot of things, and having access to the information really changed the way I view things, because I started to understand the science. It started to come together in ways that wasn't just theory anymore. And I started thinking about sports nutrition, because sports nutrition is sold to us in a different package than medical nutrition. Sports nutrition is sold to us in a package that's duplicable. If it works for one athlete, it's going to work for the other athletes. They have to kind of tell you the truth. It's not based on, well, we want to sell this product as the result of, whatever it is. So it's not like it's more reliable nutrition, I think, in many ways. And having a background in sports and having access to athletes and all this interest in sports, it led me down an interesting road, because when I got out of school and I opened up my health retreat, and I'm fasting terribly ill people, really ill people. I'm seeing sick people who have been told by the medical people that there's nothing else can be done, which translates, when we translate that into English from medicalese, translate that in English, it means there's nothing else that we can do for you. So we're not going to waste your time anymore. We can't figure out a way to charge you for anything we're going to do. But there were people who had lost hope, and yet they still hoped. They were told nothing could be done. And I'm watching sick people get well at a fasting retreat, when all we do is get out of the way and let the body heal itself by no longer putting in the negative things, the self-destructive things that they were habitually using on a daily basis. And we stopped those things and they would heal. Body heals itself, just like we always knew it did. When you get a cut, it heals itself. You get a bruise, it heals itself. You break a bone, it heals itself. And all of a sudden we've lost track of some of that. So I'm watching that happen, and I'm looking at how it happens in the most critical care situations, like the intensive care unit of a hospital. You look in the intensive care unit of a hospital, and there's their temperature, blood pressure, respiration rate, how much fluid goes in, how much fluid goes out, how everything's being monitored all the time. And they're trying to keep you in very, very tight parameters, a condition that you would call homeostasis, where things hardly change at all, and just drip the nutrition into people. And even if they're in a coma, they're being given the exact same stuff. They're being given a clear fluid that's got sugar and salt in it. Basically, it's got sugar and salt.
Yeah.
And they get well enough to leave the intensive care unit and go back to the hospital, hopefully to get even better than that and go home someday. But somehow, nobody in the intensive care unit goes up to the doctors and says, "Where do you get your protein?" They're just being given water, sugar, and salt. No protein. And people get well. And it's pretty remarkable that happens all the time and nobody sees it. So I looked at all this monitoring that's going on. I looked at the way the nutrition was being utilized. And I go, in the entire world, the people in the intensive care unit are more concerned about recovery than anybody else in the world. except for one other group of people, world-class athletes. They're worrying about recovery too, because as we all have experienced, we know how to train far in excess of our ability to recover. We can be sore for a week after a hard workout, and we could do all sorts of things to train harder than we can recover. We have to hold ourselves back sometimes. But even the world-class athletes can do that. They can train harder than they can recover. And if you can recover in 24 hours, but you train every 22 hours, because you train for 2 hours, and then you only got 22 hours until the next training, you're losing ground. And once a week or once every 6 days or once every 8, you're going to have to take a day off at some point, and you're losing ground to the competition that doesn't have to take that day off. So I started wondering, how can I help world-class athletes recover by using the exact same principles that we use in the ICU? And say, what do those people get that the athletes aren't getting? Let's apply those same things and let's see what happens. And so we started jimmying things around a little bit and saying, okay, well, what's the nutritional considerations? Sugar and salt. It's like, there's not a lot more. It was pretty funny. It was really, really funny. It's like, an athlete asked me today, is that really it? Just eat fruit after I exercise? And I go, yeah, that's really it. That is the secret. That is the big deal. It's not a big deal to do it. The big deal is overcoming all the other stuff about not using iPads and not using supplementation and not using gimmicks and gadgets and not using hot and cold and on and on and on through the various ways. So I saw that going on. I said, let's define recovery. I started defining recovery. Instead of just recovery being one thing, I got into more depth with it. Now I have 9 stages of recovery that I can define for an athlete, from what happens in between points to what happens in between years, and on, through all those steps and stages, and how can we help recovery happen on each one of those phases. And 40 years ago, people used to ask me what I do, and I said I was a lifestyle coach. But nobody had ever heard of that. But then people started calling themselves life coach. And I go, no, I don't do what they do. I have to find a new name. And eventually now, have you ever heard of a personal trainer? Sure. Everybody's heard of personal trainers. Well, I'm a personal recoverer. So I'm helping people recover their abilities so that they can be their best at what they do. I can either be a health nut or I can be a health connoisseur. I can either be the odd man out in the medical community, the only doctor in the world doing what I'm doing, or I can be a specialist in what I'm doing, leading the world towards what I see as obvious, that's bringing the best results I've ever seen, not only with the sickest of the sick, but also with the world-class performers and helping them do better. And all we have to do for us to do better in our lives is apply some or all of what they do. If we do what they do, we will get the results they get. So, as I said the other day, eat more fruits and vegetables. If we can increase the percentage of fruits and vegetables on our plate every single meal, if we eat more fruits and vegetables, we're going in the right direction. What kind of fruits and vegetables? Whole, fresh, ripe, raw, organic plants. I mean, it's just that simple. You can cut it down to 5 words: whole, fresh, ripe, raw, organic. Obviously, plants. 6 words. So I'm encouraging people to go in that direction, and it fostered a lot of questions, as it does. And I love questions. I love thinking on my feet. I'd much rather think on my feet than on my seat. And I started answering the questions, and I'm amazed at all the questions. So a lot of the questions were nutritional, and I only knew the conceptual answers, but I knew how to get the answers. So I started looking up the nutrition, and lo and behold, the nutrition made sense. The math adds up perfectly over and over and over and over. And we see that the longest lived peoples of the world eat a high carbohydrate diet. We look at the world-class performers, they eat a high carbohydrate diet. We look at all of the animals that are anatomically and physiologically similar to us, the anthropoid primates, and they all eat a carbohydrate-based diet. They all eat hot. Now, they can't go to the grocery store. They can't get exactly what they want every time. So they do eat a bug now and then, but it's out of necessity. You can eat one if you want, if you happen to see a cockroach going by and you want to eat it, but I don't want to. It doesn't look like food to me. But I have access to mango. And if I have to choose between cockroach and mango, or cow and mango, I'm going for mango. So, like a cat whose mouth waters when it sees a bird, my mouth waters when I see mangoes hanging on a tree. My mouth waters when I see fruit hanging, almost any kind of fruit hanging from a tree. It's mouth, because it's our natural food. It's our inclination. All the chemistry that goes on in our body works perfectly on fruits and vegetables. All the right things happen. It's the weirdest thing that all of the things that we are designed to require in order to be healthy, physical activity, some social time, rest and sleep, fresh air, sunshine, fruits and vegetables, all of the things that we're required to participate in order to be healthy are pleasurable experiences. I think that's kind of neat. And I think it tells a whole story. They're all pleasurable experiences. And if we can increase the percentage of fruits and vegetables on the plate, whole, fresh, ripe, or organic plants, I'm looking at the science. I'm going, wow, I can't find a downside. Like, oh yeah, eating all that fruit's really good for you in every single way, except it's bad for your teeth. Well, no, it's not bad for your teeth. It's actually what our teeth are designed to eat, is fruits and vegetables. Or they go, oh, it's good for you in every single way, except you're going to run into some other problem. No, I haven't run into any problems. I've been going 40 years. I haven't run into any problems. It just keeps getting better and better. In fact, I'm thinking clearly. I'm still playing around with kids half my age and beating them in a lot of things. I still, everything works. Like Shari was saying, everything works. I got all my parts and everything works. How glorious is that? How many guys my age can say that everything works on the program they're on? It just doesn't happen. And I looked and I go, you know what? Let's find out what's really going on. And here's the bottom line of what's really going on. Then we'll open up to questions. There's two things happening. You breathe and you eat. And when you breathe, oxygen goes in your lungs, and then it goes to your bloodstream, and then it gets to your cells. And when you eat, food goes into your digestive system, and then it goes to your blood, and then it goes to your cells. Essentially, everything's got to get to your cells. You've got to get glucose, which is the primary fuel for every cell of the body, and you got to get oxygen to every cell of the body. Those two are imperative, or bad things happen pretty quickly. In life, in health, in sickness, in sport, you got to get glucose and you got to get oxygen to every cell of the body. And scientists discovered as early as the 1950s, and have proven thousands of times since, that when dietary fat percentage rises into double digits, predictable health decline happens. And it's predictable because it happens in a predictable way. Either you compromise the delivery of oxygen to the cells, or you compromise the delivery of glucose to the cells, or both. And depending on whether you get one, the other, or both, determines whether you have a heart attack, diabetes, or both. Cancer, digestive disorder, or both. But all of the major disorders are predicated on the uptake, transport, and delivery of glucose and oxygen into, through, and out of the bloodstream. That's simple. And what we found is, as the Dietary fat, not how fat you are. That's a separate factor, but how much fat you eat compared to your total calories per day. So if you eat 2,000 calories a day and your fat intake goes much beyond 200 into double digits, 10%, once you go much past 10%, you're into predictable health decline, which is almost unnoticeable until you get past 20%. But then the average American's eating 45%. So predictable health decline is predictable. and the average raw fooder, average, is eating 60 or 70% fat in their diet. They're thumbing their nose at nutritional science, but they prove something. They prove that by the fact that, and I'm going to say every raw fooder that goes about it that way with the high raw food, high fat diet, they don't stay in it for the long term, which is why I wanted to bring you people 4 out of 5 who've been going 30 years or more on the same dietary program. It's not an experiment anymore. They found something that works and they're just working it like a charm. And Ifat was more than happy to say, I'm a newcomer. I've only been at this for a decade. All right. And to me, this tells a completely different story than a new kid on the block, saying, oh, look at me, I'm eating raw food, I'm eating coconut oil, and I'm having da-da-da. And I'm going, fine, talk to me in 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, talk to me. So let me see if you're even still involved in the vegan aspects, because most of them aren't. They came, they went, they proved to me, okay, 80-10-10 is a terrible name and a wonderful name. Okay, because the name of a book is supposed to tell you a story. It's supposed to create an image in your mind. The South Beach diet. And you see this girl who's amazingly tan with the longest legs in the world with a white bikini on rollerblades going down South Beach, and you go, hot. It's hot. There's beach involved. All titles are supposed to create a picture in your mind or a mystery. 80-10-10 is the mystery because nobody knows what it means. I started looking at diets and what do people eat around the whole world. And the worldwide average for consuming protein is 11%, which is pretty close to 10, but the worldwide average is 11%. The doctors already told us once we go past 10% fat, we're into predictable health decline. And we know what kind of decline it's going to be. And we know why it's going to be each of those things. And on a day where we had a lot more time, we could talk about how does it become cancer? How does it become diabetes? How does it become candida? How does it become heart disease? But it's always going to be those things because those are the only possible outcome of eating a high-fat diet. And we go through all that. And then we look at what are recommended. And what's recommended is we have to say what's the minimum. And it turns out if your protein consumption goes much below 3%, there's a good chance you're going to run into problems. But if it goes over 10, there's a good chance you're going to run into problems. That's those parameters that we talked about earlier, where if it's not too much and not too little, and we fall right into the range. But if the protein is cooked, then something really happens funny with that range because your temperature is supposed to be 98.6. And if it goes to 95, you're in problem. And if it's up to 101, you're in problem. It's pretty tight parameters. And your respiratory rate and your blood pressure and your blood calcium and all of these things, very tight parameters. Except for one thing, they measure white blood cell count. And normal white blood cell count's like around 2.5 million to 18 million. Could you imagine if your temperature went up by 9 times and all of a sudden, and his temperature today was 860? Well, that wouldn't really work. And the only reason that's considered normal, again, the cooked food thing is considered normal because everybody did it before we set the standards for what's normal. The only reason that's considered normal is because everybody eats cooked food. And the proteins, the cross-linked, denatured, enzyme-resistant proteins that we talked about earlier, the body responds to those as if they're foreign invaders. And so it sets out all the all-American cells, the white blood cells. You use them once and throw them away. And you have this flood called the white tide that enters into the bloodstream of white blood cells, raising the normal temperature, what's called preprandial, before you eat. The normal white blood cell count is around 3 million. But after you eat, it soars up to 15 or 18 million and then goes back down to 3 million. And that's considered normal. And it happens to everybody if you're eating cooked food. But it doesn't happen at all on raw food, making me think maybe normal actually is normal. And 3 million is where it's supposed to be all the time. And that 18 isn't normal. It's just what everybody has. And to me, I learned about a condition called AIDS. And in the condition called AIDS, what happens is your white blood cell count crashes. It just crashes. It goes below the 3 million. It goes below the 2 million. And if I get tested for AIDS solely through a white blood cell count, people might think I was very, very sick. And there's lots of things like that where athletes look sick until you find out they're athletes. And then you go, oh, your heart only beats 35 times a minute. That's perfectly fine for you. You're an athlete, or you only breathe 6 times a minute. Yeah, that's wrong, except, oh, you're an athlete. That's okay. Or lots of things are like that. And certainly white blood cell count. Oh, you're a raw fooder. That's a normal white blood cell count for a raw fooder. It's just not normal for everybody else. The only other people we see with such a low white count are people who are deathly ill and can no longer produce sufficient white blood cells because they are an all-American cell. Use them once, throw them away. Eventually, if you constantly use, you overuse, and eventually you crash. And then we fall into that other situation. So for me, I'm going, wow, what else could tie this together? And the last one was fat. And you got to have fat. I mean, it's the greatest pickup line in the world, right? Where do you get your omegas? What a nice line. But if I go to you and say, where do you get your fat? I'm going to get a slap in the face. But where do you get your omegas? Omegas they're just fat. So it's all how you say it. But a lot of studies gone into fat. And what doctors have found out is you got to have some fat. And if you go below 3%, you could get into trouble. You got to eat some fat. Fortunately, if all you eat is fruits and vegetables, your protein intake is going to be around 7%. And if all you eat is fruits and vegetables, your fat intake is going to be 7 to 9%. So if all you eat is fruits and vegetables, incorporated in those fruits and vegetables is enough protein and enough fat for us to do fine, to fall into the parameters that are recommended between 3 and 10. Because if you go over 10% fat, predictable health decline, over 10% protein, predictable health decline, below 3. And if you're somewhere between 3 and 10 on fat and 3 and 10 on protein, your carbohydrate intake, since there's only 3 sources of calories, your carbohydrate intake has to, by definition, be above 80. Hence, 80, 10, 10. As a guideline, as a pretty rough shot for not, I never eat a bite of an avocado. Of course I do. I eat nuts and seeds, but my overall average of calorie intake through the course of a week, a month, a year, is always going to be more than 80% of my calories come from carbohydrates and fewer than 10% fat, fewer than 10% protein. Or if you want it as a range, less than. Depends on whether you want a number or a range. And that's the rationale. And the science just sits so well. And people go, yeah, well, it's really good if you're an athlete. Well, it's really good if you're not an athlete. You just don't eat as much food. It's really good if you're a I mean, I've had people say it's really good if you're an endurance athlete, but not for strength. And then other people say it's really good for strength, but not for endurance. And I go, no. It's really good for people. It's what people eat. Horses eat grass and people eat fruits and vegetables. End of story. It's called a species specific approach. If you were put in a zoo, and this was done once, but if you were put in a zoo and the zookeeper didn't know what to give you, he'd say, well, what other animals are anatomically and physiologically like you? And you go, oh, well, there's the orangutan and the chimpanzee and the bonobo and the gorilla and the silverbacks and lowland and highlands. And you go, oh, yeah. They all eat fruits and vegetables. Let's give this new creature fruits and vegetables and see how it does. And the odd thing was that when this experiment was actually done, I think it was done out in the Eden Project in England, when they actually did this experiment and they put a bunch of people into a zoo situation, it gave them nothing but raw fruits and vegetables for 30 days. The people did fine, but all their diseases disappeared. So somebody came in with obesity, that went away. Somebody came in with heart disease, that went away. Somebody came in with diabetes, that went away. All their conditions, which wasn't part of the experiment, it wasn't initially picked to do that, but they found out, wow, I just can't stay sick on this diet, which was kind of cool. But it was an unanticipated effect that nobody had really, they just wanted to see what was going to happen mentally, emotionally to people who only get fruits and vegetables for a month. Would they come apart? Long before the Big Brother kind of reality shows, this was done prior to that. I don't know when it was done, the 80s or in the 90s, I think. So that's the concept. It's a very simple concept. Eat more fruits and vegetables. If you're eating more fruits and vegetables than you used to, you're heading in the right direction. The speed is up to you. It's just like if I ask you where the bathroom is, I want you to tell me the location. Whether I walk or run is up to me. So your sense of urgency of how quickly do you want to transition to fruits and vegetables? How self-supportive do you want to be? How nurturing do you want to be to yourself? I think adults need adult-sized portions of nurturing. Personally, I think life for an adult is a little tougher than it is for a kid, and kids get nurtured totally. I think adults need more nurturing than that. We should be nurturing ourselves constantly. We should be self-constructive behavior, self-constructive thoughts, self-constructive foods, things that support our overall development so that we can get on with all the things that are interesting to us, whatever they may be. As the saying goes, if you're healthy, you might have 100 different goals. But if you're unhealthy, you only have one goal. So I find it funny. People still ask me, how am I? As a kind of an opening line, how are you, Doug? I haven't seen you in a month, or I haven't seen you in a year. And I go, that's not even a question you need to ask me. I haven't been sick since this whole thing started back in the late 70s. And I just haven't been sick since. So asking me about my health is a waste of time. I'm healthy. I'm expecting better.
How many years? You got to tell me how many years has it
been? Well, I don't really know. Honestly, I don't really know. Because A, I didn't know what I was heading towards, and B, it wasn't overnight success. There was a lot of years of failure, a lot of years where I would go 100% raw for 9 months and then lose the plot, or 100% raw for a week and then lose I didn't know why I was losing the plot. I knew raw was the way to go, and I started that transition in the late 70s. And I started going towards raw. And then by the early 80s, it was like, it has to be fruits and vegetables. I remember being in medical school going, it has to be fruits and vegetables. And anything else just doesn't make sense. But I don't know how to do it because, like you said, there's a lot of volume involved. It was inconceivable amounts. The quantities were inconceivable. The idea that you have to eat fruit for breakfast, fruit for lunch, all the fruit you care for before your dinner meal of salad was inconceivable that it could be that much fruit. And I didn't understand it until I did the math. And in order to come up with 80-10-10, you've got to eat a lot of fruit or you don't supply your carbohydrate needs. And if you don't supply your carbohydrate needs, then you will predictably have cravings. You're going to have one of four cravings. You're either going to crave starches because you've been trained to, even though it's paste, even though we know that you make wallpaper paste out of starch, even though it's called in Italian pasta, even though it's called in French pastry, it's even though it's you're not supposed to eat the paste in school, and it's the same paste.
Why do these foods exist? I mean,
These
why are
foods
they
are
there?
phenomenal. These foods are incredible. These foods are awesome. We manipulated them in order to create the grains that are available today. But why do they exist? It's not like everything's here just for us.
But
First
who's
of
it
all,
for? I mean, potatoes. I
well, there
love
are
them.
birds. There are grazing creatures. There are horses and cows and all antelopes and deer, and there are lots of grazing creatures that like to eat grasses. But if you were in a field of wheat the size of Kansas, you'd die before you got out. If you were in a field of mangoes the size of Kansas, you'd never leave. So it's not like it's people food. You have to cook it. Anything that you have to cook in order to eat. I mean, there's two kinds of carbohydrates, AJ. I know you know this. There's simple and there's complex. The reason they're called simple and complex has to do with the chemistry. And we don't have to teach chemistry. We can give people an easier way to remember. Simple sugars all are so simple to digest that they require none. Simple sugars take no digestion. They taste sweet to the tip of your tongue. They're already in a pre-digested form. Those are simple. Complex carbohydrates are too complex to digest. Hence, if you look up the definition of starch, it is flavorless. It's not bland, it's flavorless because we can't digest it unless we cook it. Well, by the time we cook it and we start getting into carcinogens and mutagens and teratogens and tumorigens and tremerogens and anti-nutrients and on through this whole range of zero vitamin C. You know, Linus Pauling in 1952 won a Nobel Prize for telling us that we need 100 times the amount of vitamin C than the average person gets. And he was ridiculed by some because how could we ever get 100 times the vitamin C that normal people get on a normal diet? And then I did the math. And I get 100 times the vitamin C. I get exactly the vitamin C levels that Linus Pauling said will give you bulletproof health. And all you got to do is eat fruits and vegetables. Just do what all your teachers have told you your whole life. Fruits and vegetables are good for you. All we have to do is give like a little nod to that science occasionally and have a piece of fruit now and then. It's not a big deal. Yes, I love to eat, but the freedom that I got when I went raw was I suddenly started being satiated to a point where automatically I stopped snacking. Where I'd been eating, as I said, constant snacking, I stopped snacking entirely. The meals were so satiating that I eat a meal 5, 6, 7 hours later, I eat a meal and I'm done. And I don't think about food in between. Yes, I'm a chef. I love to make food. I think about all sorts of stuff related, but I'm not like always, what am I going to eat next? What am I going to, oh, I can't leave the house without food. It's none of that stuff. I'm solid on food. If I don't get to eat today, it's okay. And so this whole thing of, I mean, elephants aren't on the planet just so we can eat them. And neither is things that are not to scale for us. I mean, I've walked through fields of wheat. You can't eat it. We don't have the digestive enzymes to digest the starches unless we cook them. So there's no argument that it's actually people food in any way, because people were here for, nobody knows exactly, but they say a couple million years before we started cooking food. They weren't eating pasta because there was no cooking. They had millions of years before there was fire. So the cooked food experiment is the new experiment. The The high fat experiment is an even newer experiment. And those experiments have failed. They've shown us they failed. Now that we have the science to prove they failed, now that the results are coming in and we're seeing the obesity epidemic and the cancer and the heart disease and the diabetes, and we're seeing all these epidemics that we go, wow, you just don't even get those things on a low fat raw vegan diet. Those things don't exist. They're not there. Cancer can't happen on a low fat raw vegan diet. It's not that, okay, I certainly put in the first 25 years setting the stage for cancer. I'm not saying I'll never get it, because those first 25 years were the developmental years and they matter. And I can't undo them, but I can heal to the degree that I could heal and overcome that and feel great for the last 43 years where I haven't had illness and I just keep going strong. And people say, how are you so productive? The same as you. How are you so productive? Well, I'm healthy all the time and I need less sleep than I used to. I'm motivated and I can remember stuff. So I get stuff done. It's fun to get stuff done. I love to get stuff done. It means I can train harder and still recover in order to train hard again the next day. I don't need to take so many rest days from activity if I'm recovering faster. I have more time in my day. I can get more done. I can write more, be a dad, be a husband, have time to do this and still go to the UK Fruit Fest for the rest of the day, and give. I love to give. I mean, I don't know whether it's just a human thing or whether it's just me, but I love to give. I love to give of myself in order to help others become more healthy.